first step is to draw a graph. The second step, you need to compute some points replacing two numbers minus and 0, minus 2, minus 1 and 0, and two numbers bigger than 0, 1, 2. All of these numbers, you will replace it in the x. After replacing all these numbers in the x, the calculator will give you all these answers. The third step is to plot all these numbers on the graph. The minus 2 here on 4.25, it will be like here. Minus 1, 4.5, it will be on the middle. 0 and 5, 1 and 6, 1 and 6 over here. 2 and 8. Well, it doesn't fit in here, but with all these plot numbers, it's fine. Then draw a line to connect all these points. And infinity. Since here is adding a 4, the asymptote will be 4. So this is the asymptote. The fifth step is to find the domain and range. Domain, range. The domain will always be from minus infinity to positive infinity. And the range will be from 4, because it is where the graph is located, to positive infinity.
Exponential decay. A politician uses the exponential decay formula to understand the drop of investment that he is receiving and to have a well-informed loan-taking decision. Exponential rate. In the mid-1980s, a hunter brought 24 rabbits to Australia, and since the rabbits have no predators in Australia, they reproduce within each other, exponentially growing in just 10 years. You could kill millions, and it wouldn't even dent the population. Also, like telling a gossip about someone to your 2 closest friends, and those 2 tell other 2, and those 4 tell other 2, and in a day or 2, the whole school knows the gossip. The Chernobyl nuclear reactor disaster occurred on April 26, 1986, in what is now Ukraine, which was then part of the USSR. The Chernobyl nuclear reactor disaster was an explosion and fire caused in the Chernobyl nuclear plant, which released very big amounts of radiation to the atmosphere and spread all throughout the USSR and various parts of Europe. The explosion occurred as a result of tests that were being run at the reactor 4 of the Chernobyl plant. There were 31 deaths caused by the explosion, all of them being plant operators and staff. The Chernobyl nuclear reactor disaster is still considered to this day the worst nuclear power plant accident that has ever occurred. The implications of the explosion are still being dealt with to this day, as the levels of radiation in Europe are still not back as the way they were before the explosion, especially in Ukraine and Belarus, which have extremely high levels of radiation, mainly because most of the radioactive fallout landed in those areas. Despite the fact that over 500,000 workers were hired in order to contain the radioactive contamination and over 18 billion rubles were spent, the effects of the disaster continue to impact the health of the people living in these areas. Moreover, more than 985,000 deaths were caused by cancer that has been attributed to the Chernobyl disaster as a result of the radioactive contamination caused by the explosion.
What is exponential growth? A growth that is visible by measuring time an object that is being measured in a table. This exponential growth means that the rate growth is rapidly increasing relating to the growth of a total number size as time advances. A function that represents it, usually a base is not 1 and it's higher than 0, and the base has to be elevated to a variable. In this case, it has to be y equals to 2 to the x. Its main characteristics are: it crosses at 0,1, domain equals to all real numbers, the graph is smooth, the range usually is greater than 1, the graph is continuous. An exponential decay is the decrease of a quantity according to the initial value and the time that it occurs. The implications of using nuclear energy are actually, there are no much negative sides because the nuclear energy plant is one of the most clean ways to produce energy. Talking about pollution, because it does not release any kind of polluted air into the environment, and because it generates heat from fission instead of burning fuel, there is no sort of greenhouse effect. Although there are complications, because like fossil fuels, it's a non-renewable source, and if there is to be an accident, like it has happened before, the remains of the process remain to be radioactive for thousands of years. Are you aware that there is a nuclear plant in Mexico? Where is it? Do you think it's safe? We were not aware that there was a plant in Mexico, and it is located in Veracruz, Alto Lucero, in a lake right next to the shore. I do think that it's safe because after the famous disaster, there will be safety precautions in every future plant, with all the safety measurements and protocols needed. I do agree that there is a nuclear plant, because any argument that people use against it is a Chernobyl accident. But as I stated before, all the safety precautions are used. Plus, Mexico needs to advance in all the fields that it can, and it can advance in non-pollutable energy. I totally agree of the development in Mexico.
Could the Chernobyl 1986 nuclear disaster have been prevented? How? Once the explosion happened, was there any way to stop the radiation spread and its pollution? Do you think that the radioactive pollution generated by this disaster reached Mexico? Well, yes, if the workers hadn't turned off the safety precautions and the automatic shutdown mechanisms, and if the reactor would have been correctly designed, there wouldn't have been an extra radioactive in the core, and there wouldn't have been an explosion, leaking radioactive material and waste into the air. And once the radiation had moved on, there was no way to stop them, because they were in a form of gas, and there would be almost no way to stop a gas to move, especially in an open area. The only way it could have been prevented, it would have been to vacuum it, to create a sort of closed bubble that would enclose it, the whole accident, but there was no way to build it, since it was almost impossible to enter a maneuver in all the radiation. The radiation did not reach any other continent. It stayed over the area near Ukraine, Austria, Finland, and Sweden. From 13 to 30% from 190 metric tons of uranium dioxide was released into the northern hemisphere, and about 335,000 people have to evacuate their homes. About 600,000 people have been affected by the radiation, and about 4,000 had died because of it, from other countries involving Russians, Ukrainians, and Australians. 10 square kilometers of the forest, the Red Forest, almost immediately died in cause of the explosion in the fourth reactor. More than 200,000 square kilometers from Europe have been affected by this radiation. What are the environmental consequences of the nuclear disasters and use of nuclear weapons? The death of various organisms and the disruption of an ecosystem. Basically, life could be impossible for at least a century, depending on the strength of the nuclear disaster. What do you think and feel about these consequences? What will be a solution proposal for this situation? We think that the environment is already pretty damaged because of humans' fault. We think that humans shouldn't be using things that could and will harm the environment without the proper care and proper safety measurements. And our solution to this problem is not to use poorly designed faculties.